Hi, this is Penn. Penn Jillette, Penn and Teller. Big guy does magic, smaller guy next to me, he does magic too. He doesn't talk that much. Anyway, I wanted to welcome you to In Time. Welcome you all to In Time with Nick. Love you all. Peace. Go get him, Nick.
Welcome everyone to the rundown. My name is Nick Suter. Thank you for joining us. We do have Starsky, so let's put him up in front in the center there. Oh, that's... How is it that every time you come on, you get double the play? I want to figure out how that keeps happening. I have no doubt somebody's trolling me with this one, and of course there goes my camera.
You're garbling again.
Am I?
Yeah.
All right. Let's one problem at a time. All right. How's my audio at this point?
That's good.
All right. So thank you all for joining us. Just a couple of quick notes before we begin. We are simulcasting to Overtime, our sister channel, and In Time. We're moving all of our non-news content to Overtime, where you do the casual hangs like last night's fireside chat with Commander Macmillan. Very, very pleasant conversation. Those will be on Overtime if you're interested in that kind of stuff. The discussions on philosophy, society, all those things, that'll be Overtime. In Time, we'll be doing the news. This kind of interview kind of crosses both. So for now, we're doing them on both channels. But if you can like and subscribe to Overtime, that really helps us out. We're trying to get to 1,000 on that one so we can monetize. Right now, we can only accept super chats on In Time. If you have a comment, we do our best to get to all the comments. If you tag me in the live chat, I will get to them if I can. Super chats are a great way to ensure that I see them, and all of the super chats are donated to the charity of Starsky's choice, and he has chosen the 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐿 volunteer organization. So any super chats, 100% of them goes to that organization. So again, thank you for joining us. We have with us today Commander Lance Macmillan and Operator Starsky. Gentlemen, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Good evening.
And we have Starsky's dog, and we've been trying to book 𝐓𝐢𝐬𝐿𝐴, but unfortunately he's just too hot a guest. It's just beyond our... So we've been doing our best. So, Operator Starsky, why don't you tell us what's been going on in the last week in Ukraine?
There were quite a few news, both locally and globally. Locally in Ukraine, Russia continues striking multiple cities and towns. For example, epicenter mall was hit by a Russian cruise missile, I believe, and there's this network of malls called Epicenter, and it's huge. It's probably the size of ordinary Walmart, maybe even bigger. It was completely destroyed in Kherson as a result of this strike. We also know that Russians continue advancing in Donbass, specifically Toretsk and Kurakhivka were shelled. We know that one civilian was killed and 9 were injured. Numerous cities were shelled, as well as in the bordering areas like Kharkiv and Chernihiv. We know that Russians continue striking those towns, those areas, hitting towns and villages located on Ukrainian territory. and striking them with their artillery. There was one update, very, very important one. Yesterday, we learned that European Parliament adopted the resolution that calls to start the process of accepting Ukraine to the European Union, and they call to different organizations and institutions to start this process, which is awesome, and it's amazing. I think there is an opportunity that already this year Ukraine will be probably accepted to the European Union, and basically two main topics that were discussed a lot in Ukrainian society was basically this fashion contest, the Miss Universe, which ended, but still it's a very hot topic in Ukraine, as well as upcoming Olympic Games. So those two are very, let's say, actively discussed in Ukrainian society because of Russian participation, and because Russians, again, using such events to, spread their propaganda and share their narratives. And for example, when this Russian representative at the beauty contest wanted to make a selfie with the Ukrainian representative, and she didn't quite understand why she refused, which is obvious in my opinion. And also, Polish Minister of Sports said that there is a coalition in Europe, and not only in Europe, and around 40 countries may boycott the Olympic Games if Russian sportsmen are allowed to participate, which will render those competitions completely useless. And I think they should probably think whether they should invite them or not. In my opinion, the reason why they want to see those Russian sportsmen so much is basically revenue from all the companies that want to advertise their products in Russia, for example, because Russia still has huge markets, and sanctions that were placed on Russia, they are targeting mostly their military complex. They're not targeting their civilians. That's why basically a lot of companies still produce or sell their goods in Russia, and that's the reason. Because if we compare what they say about Russians and Belarusians, and what the International Olympic Committee says about it, is that they don't want to discriminate people only because of their passport. At the same time, 3 years ago, Afghani representatives were banned because Taliban violates women's rights in Afghanistan. That's why they were banned from participating in Olympic Games. And the difference is very clear, because you don't sell much stuff to Afghanistan, right? There's not a very big market, and I doubt that there's even an opportunity of negotiating some kind of export or import with like Taliban, right? While Russia still has a huge market, and a lot of Western companies as well work there. Same with Iran, by the way, because even though Iran was presented as the biggest boogeyman in the world before Russia, still a lot of companies sell their goods in Iran, like Coca-Cola, for example. Coca-Cola left Russian market, but they are still present in Iranian market. And recently, we learned that Russians drink Iranian Coca-Cola. So Iran exports their Coca, like re-exports their Coca-Cola to Russia. So basically, money don't stink, as we all know, and that's the reason why Olympic Committee wants to see Russian sportsmen so much, as well as Belarusian, of course.
All right. Well, thank you, Operator Starsky. Let me ask a couple of questions. I know Commander McMillan's going to have some questions, but I want to ask both of you gentlemen a question about the EU. I have two questions about the EU, but let's start with Ukraine's relationship to the EU. There's a lot of questions as to why did Putin attack Ukraine, and like most things in life, there isn't a single answer. Most answers are not most. There are a lot of correct answers depending on the perspective you're taking and the how and why. What was the straw that broke the camel's back? There could be any number of them, but was it expansionism, that he wants more land? Was it that he wants their resources? Was it that he doesn't even really consider them a people and wants to wipe them out? Is it because he sees them as a threat? It's, it's little a column A, little a column B. But what I'd like to talk about is the concern that Ukraine represented a strategic strategic national interest to Russia. Now, what I mean by this is that Ukraine joining NATO. Oh, I'm getting a background sound from somebody. I suspect it's Commander McMillan. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, it represented it's in their national security interest to not have NATO on their border. Now, of course, Putin has failed if that was his objective, because we know border countries are now rushing to join NATO as a result of this invasion. But nonetheless, I suspect that played pretty heavily in the decision to invade. The fact that Ukraine could join NATO, and then there would be a NATO member right on their border. I suspect that in talking to the more hawkish elements of the oligarchs and his inner circle, they found that unacceptable. So we've asked, and Commander, you pointed out several times before, that even if Ukraine expels all of the soldiers from the from Ukraine, and expels Russia completely from Ukraine, Russia can, as long as they want, until the end of time, continue to send rockets, artillery into Ukraine, killing civilians. At some point, the only way to get this to stop is to get Putin to want to stop it, to give him something that he's willing, that helps him decide, okay, at least for now, he's going to leave Ukraine alone. Is part of that NATO? Is part of that a pledge by Ukraine not to join NATO? So my first question is, of Commander McMillan, would a pledge not to join NATO, in your view, help or assist in some way at some point down the line? Not right now, because neither side is willing to talk about it, but at some point down the line, is it, in fact, do you think necessary for Putin to agree to stop attacking? Is a pledge not to join NATO? And Operator, I'm going to ask McMillan that question first, and then Operator Starsky, the follow-up is, do you think Ukraine would be willing to, if they joined the EU, say they would agree not to attempt to join NATO if, in exchange, it meant that Putin vowed never to invade Ukraine again, which would probably give you about 4 or 5 years before he invaded Ukraine again? Let's start with McMillan, please.
Sure. I think the first question you need to ask is, why would Ukraine want to join NATO in the first place? And it's because one of the entering arguments to this whole thing for war termination was that Ukraine needed security guarantees that Russia would not attack again. And I think they've clearly showed that they're perfectly willing to, wait a couple years till popular memory has faded, and then they can just repeat the process. And they'll keep doing it until they get what they want. So the only way I think Ukraine can get that kind of a security guarantee, one that says Russia is not going to attack, is to join some large alliance that provides assistance in the event of another Russian attack. And the logical choice for that is NATO. It's already there.
The EU would be insufficient?
The EU is not a military organization. It's not an alliance. It's basically just a kind of economic and political association, and it's very loose, as we saw with Brexit and the British who were in it saying, "Nah, we've changed our minds." And it doesn't have security guarantees that is what Ukraine would need in this case. Being a EU member is a step towards achieving some degree of security guarantee. I think it's fair to say that NATO members would be much more likely to say, yeah, we'll move to protect somebody who's a member of both the EU and the NATO alliance, rather than, oh, they're just part of NATO. So it benefits Ukraine a great deal to be part of the EU. But to say that the EU is a security guarantor, I think, is an inaccurate statement.
And I did cut you off. Was there something else you wanted to elucidate on, or
no?
All right.
No, I think that's good enough.
And your views, Operator Starsky?
I completely agree on that. EU is not a military organization, even though we used to joke that Ukraine will become its sort of combat wing of EU. But yeah, we need a larger military alliance, and the only option is NATO, of course. The supporters of the Russian terrorism, they always used to say that the reason why Russia attacked Ukraine was because Ukraine wanted to join NATO, but they completely missed the fact that even before Ukraine decided to join NATO, Russia already annexed Ukrainian Crimea and Donbass. The reason why they attacked Ukraine was not because Ukraine was gonna join NATO. Ukraine was ruled by pro-Russian governments, corrupted pro-Russian leaders and oligarchs for decades. Nobody even thought about joining NATO. And even though Ukraine cooperated with NATO, but the personnel from Russia in the headquarters of NATO was almost 2 times bigger than the personnel from Ukraine. So the only reason they attacked was because they saw opportunity to capture a bunch of territories, as well as strategically important territories like Crimea, which gives them complete control over the Black Sea and docks and ports and stuff like that, as well as big amount of airfields located at the Crimean Peninsula. So that's why they decided to attack Ukraine in the period when Ukraine was the weakest, in the period when our voluntary army was stronger than country's regular army that was completely ruined by all those years of being under command of pro-Russian oligarchs. One of our latest ministers of defense during this period when Ukraine was ruled by pro-Russian oligarchs. One of those ministers had a badge of member of FSB, he was honorable member of FSB. Salamatin, it was his last name, I think. So we are talking about completely expansionist war on Ukraine, which was also big time based on ethnic hatred. Instantly, in the end of 2013, when our democratic revolution started in Ukraine, instantly, brotherly Ukrainian nation turned into Ukrainian Nazi and junta and things like that. And it was basically a justification for them to start those actions, as we know. So joining NATO will be the only way to make sure that Russia will not attack Ukraine ever again. Russia is not capable of fighting against NATO bloc with using measures other than nuclear weapons, and even despite this hysteria that is being spread by Kremlin, who say, we don't care, if you bring tanks, we will deploy our nukes and kill everybody, and if we cannot have Ukraine, we will kill everybody and die ourselves, which is completely insane, and of course they're bluffing, because that's what Kremlin likes doing all the time. So that's the answer, basically.
When Ukraine became its own country, there was a series of accords called the Budapest Accords. Did Ukraine receive any security guarantees from, or any guarantees of any kind from Russia during those accords?
So we were promised security. We were promised that countries that signed those accords, and we're talking about the US, the UK, and Russia, that they will respect the sovereignty of Ukraine and independence, territorial integrity. There were other agreements, actually, because a couple of days ago, there were exactly 20 years since 2003, when Putin and Ukrainian President Leonid Kuchma signed border agreement, which recognized state borders of Ukraine and Russia. And according to this agreement, Russia and Ukraine agreed to respect each other borders, right?
And Putin himself signed that. That wasn't another. That was Putin who signed that.
That was Putin who signed that. Yes, exactly. There are pictures available online. So we're talking that you cannot trust Russians because they never keep their word. And also, they are historically known for spreading disinformation and bullshit.
All right. And then my last question before I pass this off to, actually, no, I'm going to save that question. So, Commander, did you have any questions or things that you wanted to discuss?
Sure. Assuming the dogs will allow me. Getting a lot of barking here. I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute. I think the key crossing of the Rubicon here is when you had the Revolution of Dignity and the pro-Russian camp was ejected from Ukraine. And that essentially made the Russians concerned, which is why in the end they acted. incrementally, first with the Crimean seizure, then with the not infiltrating their troops into Luhansk and Donetsk. We'd never do that. That kind of stuff. But it's because they're willing to allow a former member of the USSR to become a tributary state, which is nominally independent. But the idea of a country being actually independent, being in a position where it wants to pursue its own national objectives, where it wants to align with some elements of the world that are not part of the organization that's under Russian control, that scares them. It makes them nervous. And I'm sorry. And it is a situation that they can't tolerate. That's why they felt they needed to act. I think it's BS, of course, but from their mindset, that's what they're thinking. It's that we'll allow a certain degree of independence, but we won't allow true independence. And the moment you start trying to assert your own will, you are now an enemy of us. I think that's in their minds kind of what's going on. They won't admit that publicly, but in effect, that's what it is.
I think another thing that adds to this is this ethnic hatred towards Ukrainians, because they don't accept the fact that Ukrainians are a separate nation with our own history and language and culture, because those things were the reason why Ukrainians kept fighting against Russian Bolsheviks, against Russian communists, and against the USSR for decades. And that's why they tried to eliminate this cultural and national memory from Ukrainians, again, for decades, using different methods, using artificial famine known as Holodomor, which killed almost 10 million of Ukrainians in 1932 and 1933. So they tried everything they can. They only failed with understanding that you cannot kill a nation. It's a really hard task, especially such a big nation as Ukrainians. And they cannot realize it this time as well, because the main objective is obviously to eliminate Ukrainians. That's the reason why they keep bombing civilian objects in Ukraine, because basically what they do is what they do. They are killing Ukrainians because this is their objective. Even if it may sound stupid, but we are all their enemies. They consider every Ukrainian their enemy.
I think you also have to look at the fact that in the occupied territories, they have kind of been systematically going through and taking people who identify as Ukrainian and deporting them into the Far East, into the Urals and beyond, because they want to break that sense that there is a Ukrainian identity.
Yeah, absolutely. They did it in 40s, and they still keep doing that. But those deported Ukrainians it's a different and very, very horrible story, because, for example, just a couple of days ago, we learned one very, let's say, a bunch of very much disgusting facts. For example, Ukrainian, let's say, Ukrainian spies, okay, Ukrainian agents. They contacted through the social network. They contacted Russians who offered Ukrainian children for as basically as sexual slaves. And it's too disgusting to even talk about it. But yesterday I saw those screenshots. I saw them chatting about that. and they were showing pictures of Ukrainian kids that were stolen from Ukrainian territory. And we're talking about like kids like 5 years old and things like that, which in my eyes, it's hard to even talk about it.
If I can ask a question before McMillan continues. Commander, you're a graduate of the Naval War College, a student of history. You've seen war, you know that it gets pretty terrible. Is this, in your view, just a regular war, or would you say that this rises to the level of genocide?
That's a tough question to answer. I think it does, but you have to look at the fact that something like this occurs very frequently in many wars. You look at World War I and the way the Turks, who still can't come to terms with the fact that they basically committed a genocide on the Armenian people. You get lots of this kind of stuff. What went on in Sri Lanka when you had the Tamil wars. Those kind of things. I think, if anything, the prevalence and the frequency of those kind of genocidal wars is actually increasing.
Like worldwide?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't make the press, but it's out there. You see it with the, for example, with what's it called now? Myanmar. I want to say Burma, but it's Myanmar. There are a group of people called the Chittagong Hill tribes that are on the border with Thailand. Myanmar's army has been waging a war of genocide against them for probably 20 years now, and it's almost unreported entirely in the normal Western press because it's, out of sight, out of mind, not important, not critical. And I think part of it ties into the fact that, well, as you said with the Russians and, the Olympics and such, if it isn't a money-making thing, we kind of discount it as unimportant and we don't talk about it. We see those kind of things with the civil war in South Sudan, all of that kind of stuff. And I think as we get climate change and other pressures like that, the idea of Malthusian economics, where the pie is only so big, and the more of them that get to have part of that pie, the less of the pie there is for us. Well, if we kick them out so they can't take any of the pie, we get the whole pie for ourselves. And when you have depleting resources, I think that's something that's quite likely to start happening with greater frequency.
Joy. All right. Well, aren't you the bearer of good news?
Of course I am.
All right. I did interrupt you in the middle of your question, so please continue. Oh, okay.
Don't have anything else.
All right. So let me get to 2 super chats, and then I was hoping both of you would expand on some military questions. So we have 500 Danish krone from More Mule, and I think that was just was that a super sticker? There wasn't a question associated with that, but thank you very much for that. We really appreciate your support. It takes a lot of work to get shows like this off the ground, so thank you, and we appreciate it. That's going to be going to charity, but support is always much appreciated. Gaming with Robin, who also has super chatted frequently. Thank you. I'm going to get this one right. It's not pounds, it's euro. €6. Question for all: we've seen a ton of evidence of the Russian war crimes. Do you think anyway this ends up between in the ICC or The Hague? I hope, but doubt it. Operator Starsky?
We can only hope that it happens, and of course we can do everything we can to make it happen. But we already know that such trials are being created by the European Council, by the European institutions, by all those countries who expect to see Russian war criminals, as well as Putin, as well as Lukashenko, facing justice. So we all hope that it will happen one way or another, and if it won't, karma still works, and karma can find people very, very far away.
Yeah, I think it's important to remind folks that the International Court in The Hague does not have an enforcement arm, so they can't send the cops out to arrest somebody who's committed alleged crimes. Their country needs to turn them over to The Hague voluntarily, and that isn't going to happen unless you have a major change of government.
I wonder what happens if we actually call police.
I'd like to report a crime. Yeah,
because jokes aside, it's exactly the story that happened in Donetsk, I believe 2014. They called policemen and they said, I want to report shooting. And police was like, okay, we're listening. And they're like, so there's like one tank and a bunch of Kadyrovite Chechens. And police is like, call army, okay? But it actually happened.
Yeah, well, I mean, the flip side is there were charges leveled at members of the Bush administration there, where they wanted them turned over to The Hague for a trial. And of course, because the U.S. is not a signature to that particular treaty, we know it's never going to happen. I believe Russia also is not a signatory to that treaty. So I think it's dubious that will ever happen, unfortunately.
Russia is not a member of the International Criminal Court, neither is the U.S. With Russia not being a member, unless Putin leaves and lands in a member state that's willing to arrest him, you can't get Putin. It's the same is true of the others. The others are more likely to leave and think that they can maybe get away with not getting caught, and hopefully they can be arrested.
Yeah.
But and they won't try anyone in absentia. So until you find a way to arrest them, which is it's frustrating, but it is what it is. It's progress towards that kind of thing is slow. I was speaking of. Well, I think did The Hague want Kissinger too? Was he one of the ones that I don't remember? It wouldn't shock me.
I don't recall Kissinger being on there.
So
he might be.
There are two other. So there have been two military developments. First is a report that the U.S. is going to be sending a new missile with a range of 93 miles. I'm curious to know why it's 93 and not 94 or 92, but at any rate, presumably it's got 93 miles. And is that going to be particularly productive or helpful? We've talked about the Patriot missile systems and how they can and how and why they're helpful, but also how and when they may not be as helpful as we'd hope. So are these missiles going to be helpful? And then the other thing I want to talk about is the Russians are presumably only Russia. They're losing the war, so they've decided they're going to downgrade the armor on their tanks. Why are they doing that, and what's the net effect of that going to be? So those are my two questions for either gentleman.
Well, the missile in question is the GLSDB, or the Ground Launch Small Diameter Bomb. It's technically not a missile. It is a rocket-launched glide bomb. It has a 93-mile range, or that's the advertised. Typically, such things go further than the stated distance. Oops.
Are we boring you,
lose
Commander?
Him? Oh. Hello?
I heard you yawning.
Hello.
Oh, did we lose? Oh,
I think we lost Starsky.
No, he's
No,
here.
no,
He's here,
I'm
but
here.
his
It's
camera
just my camera sucks. I will appear again.
Okay, no problem. So anyway, the GLD or SDB or whatever I can never remember the damn letters. It does give Ukraine a basically doubles the reach of what they've been doing with the Highmar system.
Mm-hmm.
It's fired by the same launcher set. So it will give them a great new capability. No, it's not a game changer, but now it's one of those things that because it can fire farther, it makes the Russian logistic situation even more complicated than it already is. Because as each new weapon system gets introduced that has longer range, the Russians have to keep pulling their supply dumps back further and further, which makes it harder and harder for them to get supplies to the troops at the front. You know, we go back to the opening days with that famous giant convoy of trucks carrying supplies intended to go with the assault column going into Kiev. And if you have something that's that long and exposed trying to supply something, it's easy for the other side to engage it. Well, you've just now doubled the length of that road, and all the vehicles are going to be crowded on it, making it all the more harder for them to do it. So it's a useful new capability, I think is the best way to put it.
And I have an answer why it's 93 miles. Because it's not 93 miles, it's 93.2057. And the reason why it's that precise is because it's exactly 150 kilometers.
Oh,
there you go.
Okay, yeah. If I were just a little smarter, I'd have realized it's going to be in metric first.
Well, it makes sense because it's actually a joint U.S.-Swedish project.
All right, that's okay. That's that. Well done, Starsky. That's clever. See, Starsky's smarter than I am. All right. About the armor. The Russians are reducing the armor in their tanks, and they think this is a good idea.
Saves money.
Saves money. Well, and presumably, I guess they're trying to make them more maneuverable, especially if the Ukrainians are now going to have tanks that can fire while moving themselves. Maybe you want more maneuverable tanks. So I guess the thinking is they reduce the armor, the tanks can go faster and dodge incoming fire, I guess, or.
Yeah, perhaps, but I think a more realistic assessment was done, which is between javelins and MLAWs and all the other wonderful missiles that the Ukrainians have been provided, it really doesn't matter how much freaking armor you put on that tank, it's still going to get destroyed. So reducing the amount of armor on it really isn't going to make a difference.
Yeah, especially considering the fact that they don't use dynamic protection anymore. We're talking about the dynamic armor.
Oh, the ERA.
Yeah. So basically, I agree on that. Also, we know a lot of their personnel lost their job because of sanctions and stuff, and this is a good Russian economy.
Yeah. In your view, Starsky, are the sanctions helping at all? And here's why. There are a number of people, especially in the U.S., that say, well, there's still a war going on, so did the sanctions really help? We're hurting our economy. It's not actually, they can still fight. So do you think the sanctions have been a help?
Yes, they help big time. First of all, we see that Russians lost a lot of their influence, and they cannot use their energy resources to blackmail other countries like they did with Angela Merkel, for example. We see that their military production field is suffering as well. We see that they almost spent all of their strategic storage of ballistic and cruise missiles, and they are unable to bring it back. They're unable to replace those with new missiles because they can only produce something like 40 per month. And also there's one downside to this, because Russians will only start protesting in case they have nothing to eat. And a lot of, let's say, international companies already did steps towards this. For example, companies like Coca-Cola, McDonald's, and things like that. But because this sector is not targeted specifically by sanctions, people in Russia still can buy stuff and feel happy and not care about what happens in Ukraine at all. But speaking about their military industry, yes, we can see that those sanctions help. And again, most of them only start being effective basically now, like new prices for Russian oil and things like that. So we will see a lot of changes. They are already losing $150 million per day for nothing, basically. And one of my friends, 𝐒𝐤𝐜𝐴, made a calculation. So President Biden promised, I believe, $60 billion, right? $60 billion as a military aid to Ukraine. So my friend 𝐒𝐤𝐜𝐴 made a calculation, and considering the GDP of the United States, it will cost each American citizen as much as 80 cents a day.
80 cents a day.
There goes my morning latte.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. You can get a latte for 80 cents, sure.
I don't drink coffee anyway, so.
And I see all of those people in the commentaries. Of course, a lot of them are not even Americans, but some of them are still screaming in the commentaries, "Bring me back my taxes." So I can do that. Just send me an email with your check, and
you'll send
my salary can cover that.
That's very sporting of you, Commander. I sent you a DM in Discord if you could check on that. About an hour ago, the Department of Defense announced a new package of security assistance for Ukraine. I've gone through it. It was literally as we were starting the show. You should find that on our Discord too. So if you haven't joined our Discord, it's up to the minute news on that Discord. That's where we process a lot, and this is a community operated show. We get most of our information from people who submit the news to our Discord, and we have a lot there. So, but that was just as the show was starting. And I don't see anything big there. But if you see anything that's groundbreaking,
no,
let me know.
There are no big ticket items. The one thing that stands out to me, there actually two of them. The first is it doesn't sound like much, but it's going to be significant, which is the 190 heavy machine guns, which are probably M250 caliber machine guns, with thermal imagery sights. So those will be very useful, as it notes, in countering unmanned drones. Well, there are no manned drones, but you know what I mean. Taking down drones that come in, because they're not particularly high speed, and if they do come in at night, the thermal sights will definitely allow you to pick it out as it's coming in to engage it. So those will be helpful. There's also 2 Hawk air defense missile batteries. I'm sure there's associated equipment on that. Let's see. A number of counter-artillery radars that will be good for counter-battery work at the front. Other than that, it's just basically what I would call operating and maintenance kind of materials. Very important stuff to be sure, but it's not the stuff that we've seen all the discussions about recently about, oh, look, more tanks or what have you.
All right, my final. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do know that one of the things that was a little upsetting for some people was that the decision was made not to provide Ukraine with F-16s, fighter jets, and also that we are going to be providing them with the MQ-2 Reaper drone, which is a long-range, long-endurance drone that can carry a couple of Hellfire missiles. So it provides some amount of deep strike capability. The trouble is it's not stealthy, it's not fast. So unless they're not used very carefully, it's going to be easy for those to be shot down by either surface-to-air missiles or air defense jets that come out, interceptors to take them out.
You had suggested this prior, and this may be wish thinking, but it's worth noting, which is that, so first of all, the F-16 is another breed of beast, and especially if you're used to flying MiGs, it takes a considerable amount of time and training to learn to properly fly an F-16. So that's been used, at least, as one reason why the U.S. has not supplied F-16s. But you noted that there are rumors that there are pilots from Ukraine that have gone missing. And the suggestion that possibly they are in the U.S. training right now, there's no point in delivering the F-16s before the pilots are ready, but that in fact there's a possibility that the U.S. is preparing to do that. You've heard these rumors. In fact, you're the one who brought them up. So do you think there's any possibility to those rumors? Do you think it's at least possible? What's the over-under in your mind?
No, absolutely. I do think that there's definitely a possibility. I also think there's a possibility that they may have just found some way to start training these guys, and the plan is to continue providing or funding to provide the Ukrainian Air Force with, MiG-29s, that kind of stuff, from former PAC members or from former Soviet client states that had fairly extensive inventories of those aircraft. And maybe you end up giving the F-16s to those people as replacements. I don't know.
There's a simpler explanation than that, because recently Ukrainian soldiers were given like 10 days of vacation officially, and probably those guys decided, to have a rest. Just don't tell their wives, please.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas.
What happens in Ukraine stays in Ukraine.
What happens in Zhytomyr stays in Zhytomyr.
Yeah, there we go.
Oh, dear Lord. Well, there's another interesting development we're following, and I was going to ask about it, but I think I'll leave it for now. Leaked emails suggest that Kremlin Lobbying has offered payments to a number of European politicians to promote pro-Russian policies. This includes in Germany, which Germany was slow until recently replacing their chancellor in assistance. Was that in any way a contributing factor? We don't know. But this is coming. We know that they've been influencing. They've been paying. We know they've been engaged in an influence campaign in Europe. Commander, you and I have talked about quite extensively about their influence in the U.S. Most people are unaware that, for example, a Russian oligarch received from Mitch McConnell who placed it in one of their legislative packages, an exemption so that he could invest in the U.S. Where did he invest? He invested in Mitch McConnell's home district, an aluminum plant there, and has been phenomenally influential in trying to reduce sanctions against Russia. Between that, what was her name? Martina Bustana. She was the Russian spy, infiltrated the NRA. Also pals in the vicinity of Mitch McConnell and a number of other right-wing leaders. So we've seen it in the U.S.
No special favors were traded.
Yeah. Because the Russians certainly don't. Let's give me a break. I mean, the spies will.
Yeah, I think the takeaway is that as badly as the Russian army has been performing, the Russian intelligence services have been performing brilliantly.
Thank you. I think that puts it very well. It's extremely concerning, but untangling. We've been working on trying to truly untangle how much they've infiltrated U.S. politics, and it's extensive, and it's been deliberate. It's been deliberate for a very long time, and it includes, by the way, Trump. I mean, we all know about various Trump Tower meetings. We know about. I don't have it queued up right now, but the when Trump's campaign chairman was asked on live television. So Trump says that he's not taking any money from Russians. Is that true? If that's what he says, I guess. I mean, that's our position. I mean, if he says it, it's true, right? I mean,
I wouldn't have knowledge of a federal crime. No, not me.
And he stammers over it for like 30 or 40 seconds before he's finally saying, yep, that's our position. I was just like, wow. Tell me you're guilty without saying you're guilty. All right, I think you were going to say something else, and then I want to wrap it up. Yeah.
Yeah, you talked a lot about Russian influence in the U.S. I think in some ways it's probably worse in Europe.
Yeah,
I wouldn't say so, because recently there was a huge investigation performed by OCCRP and IRPI and Profil and other media, that journalists received an access to the emails that were sent to different politicians in Europe by different Russian lobbyists. So, for example, there is such Russian so-called media technologist, PR specialist, basically, Sargis Mizarkhanyan, and he was assistant and basically PR assistant for different Russian politicians and members of Russian parliament. And his email was hacked by hackers in 2016 and 2017. So all of that mail became public, basically. So it's known that he was mailing different politicians in Latvia, Greece. He had communication with Parliamentary Assembly of the European Council, and there were different projects regarding removing sanctions against Russia. We know that he also talked to different representatives of the political rightists, right wings in Italy. For example, Paolo Tosato from Italian League of North party or movement, Johannes Hubner from Austrian Party of Freedom, and they all discussed new projects, new legislation, and new resolutions regarding removing sanctions from Russia. And interesting fact was that each project was offered a budget of around 20,000 euro, and around 15,000 euro were offered if that those projects be successful. And there's a lot of interesting things. I think if you want to find out more about it, you can find it online. It's now made public. The OCCRP, Oscar Charlie Charlie Romeo Papa. Check it out on occrp.org, and you can find the details of that investigation on their resource.
Well,
Okay,
perfect.
so
We'll get that on our Discord. We'll get that on our Discord right after the show. Yes, Kinder.
no, I wanted to clarify because it sounded like with your opening statement where you were saying that the Russians were not trying to do anything in Europe, and then now it sounds from what you just described that they are.
Or was your position that they were less successful?
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, got it.
We know that Russians spent almost $300 million, again, because they have pipe, right? They have money that they can spend on anything except wealth of their own people. So they spent 300 yeah.
They don't need to eat.
So $300 million were spent basically to buy loyalty of American and European politicians and opinion makers in general. And there will be so many names that we will learn very, very soon, because a lot of their communications were, again, hacked and made public, and there's still a lot of investigations ongoing. And we will learn a lot of interesting information soon, very, very soon.
Okay.
Right, well, tomorrow, you are going to be on, and I think Dick, myself, are going to be on a panel with you on 𝐒𝐤𝐻𝐸. Is that right?
I guess so.
Okay, so that's 𝐒𝐤𝐻𝐸 tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern, and then after that, you have a full dance card. After that, you're going to be on the shills at 3 p.m. Eastern, right? Is that? I think that's right.
I guess I'm just being very skeptical about everything. So,
yeah, you have internet issues, and you also don't necessarily know the time zones because it's. But at least you're scheduled, so we'll look forward to that. With any luck, I'll see you on both of those. That should be a lot of fun. We'll drop a link to both 𝐒𝐤𝐻𝐸 and the shills on. We'll drop that here. I don't think that's in the description. I'll update the description to include those. If you're joining us, I hope you enjoyed our discussion with Operator Starsky. He will be back next week, every week, to update us on Ukraine. This channel, listen, if you want to help out, the super chats are always a big help. You can become a patron and help this channel. We really appreciate your support. The other thing you can do, if you like the content, share it with a friend. Your friend gets the benefit of it, and it really helps us out, and it doesn't cost a thing. Like, subscribe, these things as well. The reason you hear this from every YouTuber isn't for our health. It actually really does help. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel. You'll see a link there to Overtime. That's our sister channel, and it's free. If you go over there, subscribe, that helps us out as well. So if you like the content, give us a hand. It helps us to bring more content and even better content as we're looking for more guests. Next week, we're going to be interviewing the founder of the Memorial for International. It's the oh dear Lord, what was it? It was the foreign who? You know what? I should look this up. It was the Foreign Defense International Legion for the defense of Ukraine. So this organization works with foreigners who are volunteering to fight in Ukraine. They're volunteering for frontline service. They don't work with people who are there are plenty of volunteers, and there's a lot of volunteering that needs to be done. There's volunteering at hospitals. There's people who are volunteering to do all kinds of great work in Ukraine. This organization works with people who are volunteering. They're Americans, they're Portuguese, they're from Brazil, from all over the world, who are foreigners who are coming to Ukraine to fight on the front lines. We will be interviewing Maurice. He is the founder of this organization. They work with logistics. They work on getting these fighters trained, and they have a memorial for those. They have specifically a in memoriam page that monitors fighters who have sacrificed for Ukraine, foreign fighters. So we will be discussing, what motivates people to do this, how they train these fighters, how these fighters operate in Ukraine, sometimes with language barriers. And it's going to be a great discussion. We're going to be having that next week. Like, subscribe, share. If you have hit that bell and get the notifications, you are all set. You should know. You should know if YouTube does its job. When we have that discussion, join us on the Discord. You'll find that we process a great deal of news there. You will find the most up-to-date news from reliable sources, AP, Reuters, and even ABC, CNN on rare occasion when I'm feeling charitable, on our Discord. So I hope you will join us. Operator Starsky, was there any other thoughts or any other final things you wanted to say before we head out?
We should prepare for a big upcoming action in February, probably end of this month. So we will do our job. We will be fighting. We expect all those weapons. They will be very, very useful here in Ukraine. And on behalf of my people, I would like to say big thanks to everybody who supports Ukraine, because it's a proper thing to do.
I will confess, I did a pre-interview with Mars about the Foreign Legion, and he was talking about these fighters who are volunteering to go to the front lines. And after we're done, he said, well, thank you for agreeing to have me on your show and for profiling these people. And it's always a difficult thing. I believe very strongly that the Ukrainian fighters represent the best of us, and that it's an important cause, and I am privileged to have a platform where we can talk about this and talk about it honestly, because I believe the more seriously we take this, the easier it is for people to make informed decisions. And one of the informed decisions I think that should be made is to support Ukraine with money and weapons, and that the U.S. is investing in its own future, but also in the future of very worthy causes when it invests. So I'm thrilled and privileged to be able to do this. But when I get thank yous from people who fight on the front lines, it's always you're welcome, I guess. I'm sitting in this very nice office, which is as Starsky will tell you, this is real. This is not a set, or I mean, it's a set, but this isn't a green screen. This is all real. He's seen me go back there. So it is a privilege to do the very little I can to help Starsky. Thank you for coming on and helping me to do that. We do have one more. We've got a Mr. E30, 8 pounds. This is actually pounds. It's not euros. I got it right this time. $8.99 in a super sticker. Thank you so much for your support. Anyways, it is my pleasure to be able to do what I can to help. And we look forward to seeing you next week, and certainly to seeing what's coming in the coming months as it becomes easier to fight with the the conditions of the ground, which you both explained repeatedly. Thank you, gentlemen, both very much. Operator Starsky, I will see you tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern, on the on Skeptic Haven, and I suspect I will see both of you on the shills with any luck at 3 p.m. Eastern. So it's going to be a long day. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you so much. My pleasure.